thank you for joining me. And yeah, we have a Yuletide feast. Is it a Yule log? What is it? What's going on in the world of log files?
So there's been an interesting, exploit maybe, bug, feature, pick your appropriate sort of word to describe it that's appeared in the last few weeks. Pick your own word to describe it in a package called Log4J 2, which is a thing that Michael talked about in a bit that adds on to Java that enables you to log things. Actually, that's a little unfair because half the problem isn't in Log4j. It's actually in another part of Java called JNDI, but we'll come to that. Let's start at the beginning, as it were. So are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. When you're writing software, particularly software that communicates over the internet, whether that's just receiving data or processing data or sending data, one of the things you often want to do is to log what's happening. You want to keep track of what data came in, how did I process it, what results did I produce, that sort of thing, so that if something goes wrong, you can look back at those logs and think, okay, I got this data and it produced the wrong answer, or I got this and someone was trying to hack into my system and I can see where they came from. I can sort of see what was going on. I've got some sort of record of what was going on in my system. And one way you can do that is you can write that into a text file, you can print it out to the screen, capture that into a text file and things. But often when you're doing these things, your log files get more complicated. You might want to log them into a database. You might want to merge logs from several different packages together. And so there's a package called Log4J 2, which is managed by the Apache Foundation, which people use a lot. I think the best way to describe it, air, oxygen, water, perhaps equivalent for logging in the Java community. I mean, it's used everywhere. If you look at where this has hit, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Apache, you name it, think of a company name, I bet they've been hit by it.
Me, I don't run a company, but
Mike's been hit by it personally. So it's used everywhere. So it's a big deal, this thing, because it's used everywhere.
What's happened with you, Mike, then?
well, I mean, it's not too much of a disaster for me personally, but basically we're running a REST API as part of some of our research that allows us to utilise some of our GPU compute infrastructure remotely. Right now, as it happens, it's not currently turned on, this API, so I'm not immediately vulnerable to it, but I'm very aware that I'm using Log4j for logging, and I'm going to have to go through, I mean, you know, quite simply, I can update Log4j, but what I really need to be doing is going and making sure that I'm not passing any unintentional user input into my logs. Right, and off the top of my head, I can't remember. So this is kind of the problem, right? You can log anywhere in your application any amount of data. What am I logging? Right, I'm going to go and have to find that out and make sure that I'm not putting something where it shouldn't be, and it's going to cause this problem.
That sort of alludes to what the problem is then, Steve. So over to you then, maybe.
So Mike's been using this to log things, and one of the things, as we said, is that you log is the data coming in, because from a security point of view, if someone hacks Mike's server, and I suspect it's not that hard to do because Mike wrote it, then you will want to be able to track back and find how Steve hacked into it. And so you can look at the log and you can see, oh, Steve sent this set of information to it, that caused some sort of exploit, he then got root, etc. and things. So one of the things you will log a lot is untrusted data. It's data that's coming in from sources that you can't trust. Now, that's fine, except that Log4j has a lot of features which make it very, very nice for developers to use. Because as well as logging the data that's coming in, you're probably going to want to log other information about your system, what operating system it's running on, what version of Java it's running, various stats about your own system. And so what Log4j does is it enables you to substitute in the strings that you log. So you're just logging plain text strings, you say log this, and it logs it wherever you want that log to go. What you can log are variables. You can sort of say dollar curly brace, something curly brace, and as it processes it, it'll take that dollar curly brace and replace it with some string that's defined, I think it's in a hash table equivalent, that you set up when you use it, or there are some that can be pulled in, things like the Java version and so on. So you can sort of log useful information alongside the data that's coming in. Now that sounds fine, that sounds useful, it sounds great in fact, except that it does this recursively. So when you log something, it'll go through, and any place it sees dollar curly brace, it'll replace that with a string. But if that string contains dollar curly brace, it'll replace that with the expansion of that string, and so on. So it's just a recursive process. But this also means that it will do that on any untrusted data that you give it. So if I sort of make a web connection to Mike's server, and Mike thinks, I'm going to keep track of what's going on here, so I'll log the IP address. So it logs the university IP address, sort of 128.243.56.55, whatever it is. I've just made that one up, and things. I hope that isn't a really useful server. So it'd log that. But it might also decide to say, I'll log the user agent. What sort of web browser is logging this? And so it'd log that. But if I'm a crafty individual, then I could change that user interface to have a sort of dollar curly brace in it, and then some stuff, Java : version curly brace, and Log4j, when it logs that string, would replace that with whatever the current version of Java is, or whatever that's expanded. Now that doesn't sound like too much of a problem, except it means that you can't trust your logs anymore, because what you thought you logged is partially under control of you, the programmer, and partially under control of me, the hacker, sending you data. So you've suddenly found that actually your logs perhaps aren't logging exactly what you thought they were, and things. But the real killer comes, and this is what makes Log4j so devastating and why people are really trying to fix this, because people are using this, is that there is another feature that was added, I think it was around 2013, which was the ability to use the Java naming and discovery interface, I think it is, I can't remember what the I stands for, to look this data up in other services. So things like the LDAP Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, you can do a DNS lookup using JNDI, RMI interop type stuff, you can do lookups in there. So you can ask other services to look things up. And what someone found is that if you craft a simple enough string and you put it in something that's going to get logged, like your user agent, then that will then be expanded out, and Log4j will hand this string over to JNDI, and JNDI will look at it and say, okay, this is LDAPs : / then some address, and think, okay, I'll go and talk to that LDAP server and request information. And so as a person who perhaps maybe up to some nefarious purposes, I can send a perfectly well-crafted string to Mike's server, or whoever's server this is, that gets that machine to connect to another machine. Now, that's bad enough, but, and this is where it starts to get worse, remember we said that the variable expansion was recursive, so I can put that into a string that I wanted to connect to, so connect to this LDAP server / curly brace Java : version curly brace, and find out what version of Java they're running, or what operating system they're running, or get access to the environment variables and start to get information about what's going on their system, how their system is configured. And so this leaks information from what should be inside their firewall, their setup, to me outside, as long as I've got a server that I can control here and make them make requests up to that server. And as long as I don't do this running on my own machine, so they know exactly where I live and they can come and sort of arrest me and things, then I can find out information and collect that information. Except that's not the bad bit. That's only the sort of mildly annoying and sort of, yeah, the really bad stuff. And I don't understand why this is even part of Java, but for some reason it is. You can craft it in such a way that when you make that JNDI request to the LDAP server, it can return back a Java object containing code, which the server will, or whatever system is running this Log4j, happily then run untrusted code on your server, which I could use, or Mike could use, or Sean could use to do whatever havoc that they want to do on that machine. So the problem we've got is we've got the feature in Log4j which enables us to make JNDI requests from outside the software, And then we've got the feature, if you can call it that, in JNDI, which for some reason will happily go down and download a Java class file and execute it on that machine for us. So coupling these things together, what people found is, and I think they did this while playing with each other's and hacking each other's Minecraft servers, is that you can basically execute code on someone else's machine very, very easily and things, which is never a good situation to be in. And the problem, and I think Mike's going to demonstrate this in a second, is that Log4j is like milk, it's like water, it's everywhere. This isn't just a problem that would affect the machines that are talking to the outside world. They can collect data which gets passed to another system within the thing, which can then process the data. It only takes one of those things to be running Log4j and log the data for you to get a foot in the door, as it were, and your code to get executed. It's not reliant on it being the machine you're talking to, as long as something gets past something that gets past something. And one of the really nasty things is that you can sort of build these up, and it could end up being composed from two separate things if you were really clever and knew what was going on. Then it would still have the same effect.
It reminds me a bit of the little Bobby drop tables exploit. Is it similar to that, or am I just
almost identical to that?
Yeah, one of the big problems with it is actually also how easy it is, right? I mean, this is not a difficult string to craft. You can just go on Twitter and there are 50 examples in your timeline. And so it's that perfect combination of quite easy to exploit, doesn't need a huge amount of expertise, and everyone's vulnerable to it, right? It's just, you know, I mean, I was meeting a friend who works for a company in Nottingham, and they were up on Sunday night until 2 a.m. trying to fix their servers, right? Trying to push updates to Log4j to all of their servers to prevent these kind of attacks. They weren't necessarily getting attacked yet, right? Because a lot of people are just fishing around. But, I mean, I think today there's a worm going around trying to execute this kind of attack on vulnerable servers. So, you know...
Does it come with the Java install then? Is it kind of like a given? You just get this automatically? Or
not quite. It's very close. It's very close to that. I think that one of the reasons, and in fact I can demonstrate that now actually, but one of the issues you have is that it's incredibly straightforward to use. It is almost the default. Right, it's not. I mean, I've got an example here that I created a Spring Boot application. It's not the default in Spring Boot, but it might as well be if you read any of the tutorials, for example. It's a couple of lines to swap this logger in and start logging things, which it's good that that's easy to use in some sense, right? Because for me, who doesn't know a huge amount of Java, needs to get an API running nice and quickly, I can do that with very minimal effort, right? I don't have to go and learn, you know, read a whole textbook on this. But on the other hand, I'm now finding myself in a situation, which is essentially my fault in some way, that I'm using a logger I don't really understand with features that I don't really understand, and it's causing me vulnerabilities. That's where I find myself. So let me show you how easy this is, right? What I've created here is basically it's a Spring Boot application. Now, Spring Boot is an incredibly powerful, you know, dependency injection framework, but really, from my point of view, it just allows you to create very, very simple REST APIs and other web servers. So I've done that. I've created a little web server that runs on my laptop, and if I go to localhost/API/my URL, it sends me back a string, right? Very, very straightforward. Now, my API that I use at work is obviously a little bit more advanced than this, but basically it's the same principle. Now, if I go into my Maven POM file, I can see all my dependencies, and I can actually say, okay, I'd like to use Log4j for my logging, so I'm going to paste that in. What it's saying here is remove the current logger, which is the default one that comes with Spring Boot, and then replace it with Log4j. Right, so I'm going to save that. As soon as I put in one of these dependencies, Maven says, oh, you've added something, would you like me to get it for you? So I click this refresh button, and off it goes and starts resolving dependencies and downloading all the jar files for me, essentially. So it's now downloaded Log4j, just at the bottom there, and now I can use Log4j. I've coded up this very, very simple REST controller. So all I need to do is start adding some logging, right? So to do that, I import the logger. This won't take very long, by the way. So if I type import org.sl4j.logger, so this is the interface that we're going to be using for logging. And there are a few loggers, and you know they all operate in basically the same way, using the same interface. So you don't have to use Log4j, but of course many, many people are, including me. Org.sl4j.loggerfactory. If I run this application, all I'm doing is I'm listening for GET requests on this particular URL. So if I run it, we're going to see a load of logs. This is Spring Boot firing up. It's firing up databases and all kinds of stuff. So if I go to my URL, you can see it comes back with world's best REST API as its string. Right, you know, I mean, I'm not wrong. It's fantastic. Now, maybe I want to log that someone's gone to this URL. So all I need to do is obtain the logger for this particular class, and then I can use it. Right, it's very simple. So logger L equals logger factory dot get logger, and then this dot get class, and then I can say logger L dot log, and then you can have different kinds of logs, right? So anyone that's logged will know you have like debug logs, warnings, errors. Let's just throw a warning for the sake of being simple. So I can say l.warn, and then I'm going to go, this is a warning. It's not very informative. This is exactly, I mean, this is probably why my API isn't vulnerable, because my logs are not helpful. So let's run that again, and then I'll go to my API again. It's just starting up. There we go. Rerun this. And then we can see in here, I've got my warning show up in my logs. Right now, my log is just going out to the console, but it could go to a file, it could go to a database. Right, this is Log4j is pretty flexible, and you can do most of this through config, so it's quite easy to use. So that was basically all there was to it. You go into some Java application, and you say to something like Maven or Gradle, I'd like to use Log4j. It just finds the code on the internet and downloads it for you, and that's literally it. So it's no surprise that people are using a lot of these libraries. Why would I code my own logger when there's this great logger I can use? And so one of the real problems here is just the prevalence of this library in anything Java.
So that kind of brings us round to why has it got these functions in it? Is that right? Is that where we're going, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the issues is that you've got when you include a library, you get all this functionality, but you also get all the bugs and all the other features that come with it. And you might think, okay, well, by not writing my own log files, I save time. You do. My program's more secure. Probably is, because someone's actually thought about it. It's being used a lot. The bugs have been found. But the problem we get is that you're still using a library is still importing someone else's bugs into your program. The nice thing about open source software is that you can look at the bugs and you can fix them yourself and then share them, but you still need to fix the bugs. You still need to analyze that code to check that it is actually doing what you expect it to. And I think, as Mike's shown, is that it's very easy to use this without thinking about all the ramifications, about all the features that you perhaps aren't even aware of. I mean, I suspect 90% of people who use Log4j, I'm making up statistics on the top of my head, I should get a job in government, probably didn't even know that it could make a JNDI call, and probably had never heard of JNDI before the vulnerability had come out anyway. And so I think if you're designing a library, the take-home message from this is keep it simple, get it to do one thing well, and then design another library that can be built on top of that so that people can compose the services that they need to do what they need it to do. So if you're building a library that logs things, log the data untransformed. If people need to transform the data before it's logged, well, that's another library which transforms the data, and then you compose that on top of the logging information so that you can do it in a way that, as a programmer, is secure for your use case, for your application. I think what's gone wrong here, and this is not a criticism of Log4j, you can see the similar problems popping up all over the place. There was an example a few months ago where iPhones were being sort of bricked because there was a Wi-Fi network popped up with a %s in it, which caused printf or sprintf inside the kernel or something to do a equivalent expansion of that, and it all went horribly wrong. So I think you need to make sure that you build libraries that do one thing well, and then compose other things on top of that if you need that functionality, and only if you need that functionality. Slightly ironic thing is if you actually look inside the Log4j source code, a lot of it is already built like that, in that you've got the logging functionality, and then when you do message lookups and sort of look up these variables and things, that's an extra layer of code which is sort of put as an object on top of the other object using the decorator pattern and things. And you just think, if this was exposed to the outside world, if this was how the API was constructed, then Mike could just say, no, I just want plain logger at this point and things. And then later on, he could use the other bits to build up more complicated logs for the bits of code that he knows it's safe to do so.
So it sounds like the problem is somebody's packaged all of this together instead of perhaps offering it as options or, as separate components. Is that fair?
I think so, and it's understandable why that's happened. It certainly makes it easier for a programmer to be able to do this. And you can see why someone requested that the JNDI was in there. They were sort of, it'd be great if I could just look up this username against the person's name. They were probably writing something internal that never spoke out of the internet. But the trouble is that because that gets composed into so many different bits of software, that functionality suddenly becomes a vector for doing other things. So, as I said, when you're writing the libraries, keeping it from a security point of view, if you keep it simple to do one thing, then the programmers who are using that hopefully will then only use the bits they need. It's great having huge libraries which do everything, but if they do everything, there's more spaces for there to be bugs, and yeah, there's just more spaces for there to be bugs.
One of the interesting things about this is that it comes up a lot in discussions among sort of tech enthusiasts and people who are working in the industry, is that no one's paying for Log4j, right? So what right have we to ask that it's secure against some attack and so on? And I think to an extent that's true. Actually, I think that this actually happened before with OpenSSL. OpenSSL had the Heartbleed bug. Now that was an actual bug in some sense. It's slightly different to this. But it turns out at that time that many companies, some of which make a lot of money, were using this for free and have now been exposed by a bug. And maybe that bug wouldn't exist if it had been properly funded. Right now, we can't predict the future from the past and so on. We don't know what would happen if there were lots more people working on Log4j. Maybe one of them would have spotted it. But I do think it's interesting to think about just how many people, including myself, who are using these libraries without much consideration about where they came from or who's actually doing the work, right? And I think that when this thing was implemented in sort of 2013, it was with the best of intentions, and it's caused somewhat of a problem, right, more recently. And yeah, it's something to think about.
The advantage of open source in cases like this is that the source code is available, which means that you can look at the library and say, okay, this is a problem, I can fix it, and then you can share that fixed version. You have the ability to take the source code, to look at it and fix it. Open source is not going to give you a badge of quality to say, and we can see that here, that this software is secure. That's not what open source means. Open source means that the source code is available for you to modify and fix, and hopefully share that with the rest of the community. And so I think the advantage here from people's point of view is that if you've got a library, you can hack it about and take out the bits you need and just use them, rather than sort of, if you've got a DLL from Microsoft or something, you'd have to use it as is and have no ability to change it. The great thing about this, which is where I think open source shines, is not that the software is free. It's not that how it's licensed. I think it's the fact that the source code is available and I can edit it and I can fix it myself and then share those fixes.
The conversation surrounds these people who are doing what appear to be keystone bits of software in their spare time, effectively, at the same time as doing a full-time job, perhaps as a developer for someone else. They might have just kind of been the last one holding the baton, and they're tasked with maintaining something that 90% of the world's Java runs on. Yeah.
Although that can be a double-edged sword, because, and I'm not saying this in this case, but you could see, for example, bits of software that really should be allowed to die. I mean, let's suppose that MS-DOS was open source. You can guarantee that there would probably be a community of people still maintaining MS-DOS today. We probably don't want bits of software like MS-DOS still being maintained. They're interesting historical curiosities. They're not software that should be used today. And that's the danger, is that software exists beyond its sell-by date because anyone can maintain it and it still looks useful.
It's one of those situations which is interesting because there's basically been no winners at all, right? Everyone that's been using Log4j has got to drastically quickly patch all their stuff and redeploy it, and maybe you've got 10,000 instances on AWS you've got to deploy, right? This is not trivial. And I'm lucky with my little API that's not even running. I can fix and rerun it when I need to. You've got the developers who are desperately trying to write patches for this thing, and of course that by fixing one bug you might introduce other bugs, right? And this takes time. You can't just fix this problem in 5 minutes and push a commit and it's all solved. So I think that the response has been pretty positive, I would say. Companies are just getting on with trying to fix this, but we're not going to see the end of this for a while, right? There's going to be issues like this, and as Steve said, issues in other libraries are going to come up from time to time. It turns out everyone was using, and only 2 people were writing the thing, and this isn't going to be the last time that happens.
I think that for me, the thing this shows is that Pandora's box is now well and truly open. People are going to be looking at every library, every open source library, every closed source library to try and find similar things where this can come along. We think this is bad. We've probably not seen anything yet.
Some of the rounds we do in columns. So we mix A, B, C, and D. And then we mix this column, and then we mix this column, A, B, C, and D in this column. So sometimes we mix diagonals, so it would be A,
You can start to
B,
see it.
C,
All is going to Cogent and Telia. And then as we go a bit further on, we suddenly see that everything starts to disappear.